can you share a little bit about what your relationship was with body image and dieting, and then how that's brought you to what you've been doing now for, it's been many years you've been helping so many people.
Yeah, no, I've been blessed. Heal Your Hunger's been around for, I think, 6.5 years. But my journey started, I mean, my journey of helping people with emotional eating started like over 30 years ago, actually. Heal Your Hunger is just my latest iteration of how I help people, which is online. But I started being interested in this work really from my own personal experience, which is having an obsession with food, having an obsession with weight, being an emotional eater, which means I just ate beyond what I needed nutritionally. I loved food. Food was a highlight for me growing up. I just, would get so excited for going out to dinner as a family, or if I got to have my favorite foods in front of the TV on a Friday night or a Saturday night. So a lot of food focus, but my self-esteem took a big hit. I didn't like how I looked. I was obsessed with the roll on my tummy. In my TEDx talk, I talk about having this roll that it would scrunch up in my hands, or I'd think, oh, maybe I could join the army and go through boot. They'd force me to exercise in boot camp because I hated exercise. So some kind of strange and deranged thoughts, which is really evidence of how desperate I felt. Like, I just felt like, oh my God, like, and of course I dieted, that's the first thing you do is like, oh, let me go on a diet. Let me try this diet. Let me stop eating this, stop eating that, limit my calories, go to the gym. I mean, there's so many different things I would do. And if I could lose weight, but I always put it back on. And so that's where the real frustration was for me, is like, how do you ever lose it and keep it off, and that's what I didn't have a solution for the longest time. But thankfully, of course, I did find a solution. And that was when I stopped the whole dieting roller coaster ride and started to look underneath, my food obsession as to what was I really hungry for, and what was really at the root of my compulsion to eat, my out of control eating. So that's when everything changed, is when I started asking those questions. I got help to go deeper, look deeper within. Got off the whole, as I said, the dieting roller coaster ride, and started making peace with myself, and changing my living habits.
From the moment I first heard what you called your show in your community, it resonates because it's this idea of like, there's something deeper, which is your story. It wasn't just the physical stuff to fix. It wasn't fix the food. It wasn't do more exercise. You were an athletic person. So it was much deeper than that. And I think something you said, I watched your most recent YouTube video about Thanksgiving,
Oh,
when this, and you said something which stuck with me so much. I mean, everything, that video is gold. People should find that. But one of the things you said in there was that it wasn't even about the weight, because the thing was that even when you had been smaller, you still don't feel comfortable in your body because there's that deeper stuff that's not healed. Can you share this connection between body image, body perception, and then and healing that? What is that relationship with what's going on in our mind and how we perceive ourselves physically?
yeah. And it is so true. Like, I kind of joke about this. And people who struggle chronically with food and weight know exactly what I'm talking about, which is we look back at our former like versions of ourselves, right? Like we look back at pictures 20 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever. And we're like, if we're struggling with weight specifically, we'll look back and be like, wow, like I wish I were that weight. But I remember at that weight, I wanted to be another weight, right? And so I wish I were the weight I was at when I hated the weight I was at, right? Like, it's like, oh my God, like, why wasn't I satisfied? What was I thinking? I looked fine. You look in the mirror and you don't see right. There's a technical term, body dysmorphia, clinical term, but to me, it's like we cannot evaluate our weight properly. You just can't see it. And I think that's very common for anybody who has disordered eating. And that's a huge spectrum: anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, overeating, starving, right? I mean, there's bulimorexia. There's a gazillion different
Yeah.
ways that we manifest our dysfunction with food. But to me, it's all under the same umbrella. And I actually like the term emotional eating because it's all emotionally driven. So emotional eating isn't just overeating over your emotions or your undealt with stuff. It's under eating over your emotions and undealt with stuff, right? So we use under eating to control our emotions just as much as we use overeating. It's another obsession, and obsession is really just a way to trip out and not be present with our feelings.
And this was going to be the second question, because I love that you put it all under emotional eating. Often we think emotional eating means that you're overeating, but as you said, it's not just that. It's also
Mm-hmm.
restricting. It's any way that you're having your emotions guide you. And I know that you talk about a spectrum, emotional eating spectrum. Can you talk a little bit about those categories on it? I know you've talked about like food addicts versus different types of categories. What are some of the ways that maybe people listening might be able to self-identify? I know you have a quiz
Yeah.
too.
Well, here's the thing. So the spectrum, I call it the emotional eating spectrum. I actually have a quiz on my website, a free quiz people can take to find out where they are in that spectrum. The point is, it's like on the low end to me is just general emotional eating. Like we all have the tendency, I think we're all hardwired to have an emotional connection with food. It's not a terrible thing. And that means you may go overboard once in a while, and then feel bad and then course correct. And then there may be somebody on the high end of the spectrum, which is more food addiction, which is where somebody is an all out binge eater and they abusing themselves with food. And I did that. I mean, I had violent binges. And I was just talking with one of my coaches about this, is that I would go out in the middle of the night and get binge foods. So I was on the very high end of the spectrum where if I had to have sugar and carbs, I would go get them. Like nothing could stop me. I was an addict. Like I had total alcoholic behavior with food, And so to me, it is a spectrum. We're not all on the same place of that spectrum. The two things that qualify, like if somebody takes that quiz, the two things that qualify where they're going to end up and what their score is one, the level of control they have, like can they course correct? But also it's control and consequences. Their consequences are higher when they do that, when they have those big swings in weight, which I did. I was a yo-yo dieter. I could lose weight, but I put it right back on again. And it's very unhealthy to do that. Your body takes a hit. So that's somebody with a lot of consequences, especially as you age. The older you get, the more, you're yo-yo dieting, your body's going to hate you for it. You're going to have joint pain and prediabetes and diabetes and hypertension and, high cholesterol and gut issues. I mean, it goes on and on. So
Mhm.
control and consequences, that's really what determines where we end up on that spectrum.
Is the control ever before making the decision to eat the food? Do you qualify that at all? Like, so for instance, you've got the control after, where you think, okay, I'm going to go back to balance after this binge. I'm going to just take it back to my normal routine without shame. I'm figuring it out. Or the control where you see all this food and you have what you want, and then you just kind of say, okay, that's enough. I mean, how do you fit that in there?
Well, if somebody has that kind of control, more power to them, right? They have the ability to do that. Um, if that wasn't me, I would lose control. But if it's not a problem, it's not a problem. For those who are super like overly controlling, like they are more in the restrictor, my experience is if you're super controlling, it's a telltale sign that something is out of control, because we wouldn't need to, exert control if we weren't out of control.
It's the one
Right?
thing you can manage.
Yeah. And I've been there too. Again, I've been on all sides of this thing. When my dad was dying of cancer, I got really skinny. And I didn't mean to, but I was in so much pain and I couldn't control my dad's dying. Like I was totally out of control, and so I ended up using food as the only thing I could control. Was a situation I had no agency over. So, we use food in lots of different ways beyond our nutritional need. And, that's why looking at our emotions is so important, because it's never about the food.
And this is where I would love to ask you a little bit more, because I think you sharing your story about your father, which thank you for sharing that, because I know many people listening might resonate, that feeling of grief, and how do you handle that? Everything is out of control. You feel numb, you feel extreme pain, and it's so hard to wrangle in those emotions. And something you talk about is how overeaters tend, or undereaters too, tend to bury their emotions. Can you talk a little bit about what
Yeah.
that process is? Why does that happen?
Our disordered eating, I'll say our emotional eating, does come from a place when we were younger, comes from trauma, comes from dysfunction in our families. And my experience is, again, it's like the one of the few things we can control as kids, but it's not only a control, it's the one of the few things we can, turn to for security, for comfort, for relief. Food is there. Food is there for us. Food is like right there. And that's why at a young age I started packing on pounds, because I had sexual abuse as a kid, and I just, it's what I could do to feel protected, to feel a sense of comfort. And so, what saves our lives as kids, like I often tell my clients, like, food did save our lives, but at some point it turns on us. And at some point, then it starts costing us big time. But as a kid, back to your question, I couldn't handle my feelings, and food enabled me to not feel. Like, I ate to numb. That sugar and carbs was numbing me out, and it did work. Again, it saved my life. It worked. It certainly was a means of numbing my feelings that felt out of control, that I had nowhere to go with. Like, who could I talk to about stuff? It wasn't the culture. The culture was, look like everything is fine. Just look like everything's fine. Act like everything's fine. Get good grades. Wear nice clothes. Be a good girl, and you'll be fine. But then there's a whole life below the surface where it doesn't feel fine. It does not feel fine. Something's wrong. We use whatever we can use to get us by. When the pain of avoiding our emotions through addictive habits gets great enough, that's when we do something. And doing something doesn't look like a diet. In my experience, doing something means finding safety, people who are safe, where you can start to unpack what it is you're running from, who it is you're running from, which of course is ourselves.
I mean, I'm trying to think, how can I unpack this amazing answer, because there's so many things you talked about. I think there's the point about the toxicity of the good girl culture. I think that's a huge reason why so many girls and women suffer, because we have this paradigm we have to uphold, and that means bearing your emotions. It means not showing certain things that have affected you. That I think is changing, thank God. But then there's also what you were saying, which is, and I love that you said this, because people don't talk about this, how it worked and we needed it when we were younger, when we were still developing, and we didn't have the coping skills then, but we can have them now.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the thing. And you know, I mean, God bless my parents. I actually had pretty decent parenting. My parents were not good at feeling their feelings. Obviously, they modeled that to me and my sisters. But at the same time, they did a lot of things right. I was in a safe home. But it is, in spite of that, we all were stuffing our feelings in one way or another. So the process of healing is a reparenting. We're learning to parent ourselves, because we certainly haven't been doing that for so long. We stay up too late. We burn the candle at both ends. We overeat. We're in bad relationships that don't serve us. It's like there's so many ways we abuse ourselves and really deny ourselves joy and happiness and love and peace. And so it's time to take ownership of of our healing journey, and realize that this is so much more about a relationship with ourselves than it is about a relationship with food or with, body image. It's really a relationship with ourselves. And we have to take a look at, where am I hurting myself? Am I people pleasing? Am I taking on projects that are way beyond my ability to follow through on, or without at least stressing myself out? Right? Am I trying to seek validation from people that I really don't even care about? Have I lost myself? Where have I lost myself? Am I in a relationship where I care more about what the other person thinks of me than what I think of me? Am I contorting myself to be liked and loved? I mean, these are ways that emotional eaters especially hurt themselves, And I often say it's not an eating problem, it's a living problem, which means we have to do things differently. We have to set boundaries on our time. We have to stop people pleasing, or at least trying to change that pattern. We have to stop acting like everything's fine. We have to stop shoulding on ourselves. Like, I should be happier. I should be prettier. I should be more helpful, whatever. It's like, these are the living issues that when we address those, we have much less need for running for, escape and food.
Do you find, because these are, and I'm sure people listening, when they see the episode, they think it's going to be all about food. But as you said, it's not a food problem, it's a living problem. And you've listed so many things that most of us have experienced, and we have different ways of coping. What is, if someone's listening, because it's overwhelming, right? Thinking about all of that versus just going to the refrigerator, it's hard to think about that. What are some of the things you tell clients or on your show or in your book to start with? If you're in this space where you're recognizing, I have an issue here, I don't want to be in this situation anymore. Like, what's the first tiny, tiny step to change?
Yeah, I'm going to give you something I call the PEP test, which is just a way for people to start noticing their behaviors around food. I think we've all heard it's not about the food. So it's easy to say, oh, it's not about the food, but what is it about then? Like, let's dig into that. So the PEP test is a way to ask yourself, like, what am I really hungry for? And also, what's really going on? So when you're going to the refrigerator, like, I used to go to the refrigerator like 5 times a night. Like, I'd get uncomfortable doing my work at night, and I'd get up and go to the refrigerator, open the refrigerator door, and just stare. Like, what here can take away my uncomfortable feeling? Like, I don't want to do the work. I don't want to push through and problem solve. I don't want to, whatever it was. I don't want to do my taxes, whatever it was. And I would stare inside the refrigerator. I'd close the door. I might eat something, might not eat something, but I kept going back to the refrigerator. And so for anybody who has that habit of just going to the kitchen looking for something, the PEP test is a way for, we all know what unhealthy foods do to us, but the PEP test is a way to start digging into what it's doing for us. Yeah, because it's like, that food is serving a purpose, like, no question. So the PEP is it's an acronym, PEP. The first P stands for painkiller, which we've already talked about. Like, food numbs our pain. Like, and the reason why we don't binge on salads is because it doesn't work. Like, it won't kill the pain. Right? We're not like, get me a good crown of broccoli and let's go to
If
town.
only.
Yeah, right? No, doesn't work. So why do we binge on carbs and sugar, high fat foods? Is because they kill the pain faster, right? Than something healthy. We want heavy, think of it like a blanket over your emotions. We need a heavy blanket, to really smother those emotions. And so food is a painkiller. The E stands for escape. Food is an escape. Like, that's why I would get my binge foods and then go sit in front of the TV and be there for 3 hours, and I'd eat everything I had. And then I'd just pass out on the couch after, it came to just commercials and there's nothing left, This is back in the day when there weren't like streaming shows and Netflix and all that.
When you couldn't pay to not have them.
Yeah. When it was endless, the things you could watch. So, but anyway, it's a great escape, and what we're really trying to escape is our own heads. because overeaters are overthinkers. Like, we are overthinking everything. Good God. We just, what did she mean by that? Why did he look at me that way? Why wasn't I invited? I'm sure I'm going to get fired, right? Like, it's like we just, our brains don't stop. And we awfulize. We think of the worst case scenario all the time, when the best case scenario is just as likely to happen. It's not what we focus on. And so we're really trying to escape our own brains, the fear and the worry and the doubt. And it works. Again, we numb out in front of the TV and we go to a faraway place, and it works temporarily. And then the last letter in PEP is another P, and it stands for punishment, which is kind of weird because we don't think of food as a punishment. We think of it as a reward, right? Like, I'm tired. I've had a long week. I'm going to get my favorite meal, my favorite dessert, and sit in front of the TV. And, my experience is going into it, it's a reward, but on the back end, when we've overdone it and we've binged and we feel really sick, and then we don't want to show up for brunch with girlfriends the next day because our face is bloated or whatever, we feel dark, we just want to pull the curtains and lay in bed, that's more of a punishment. And we had to face that. Why am I doing that to myself? I feel sick. I feel disgusting. I hate myself after a binge. Like, what's that about? And we do feel an inordinate amount of guilt. We feel super guilty, and we feel guilty about everything. Like, everything's our fault. And not that there aren't things that we do, right? Because we're human. So of course the things we do wrong. And then of course we're beating the crap out of ourselves for that. And then what better way to beat yourself up than to eat a bunch of unhealthy foods where then you just feel terrible. So this is another aspect of what the food is doing for us. So again, a recap, the PEP is painkiller, escape, and punishment. So I would just say, put that in your pocket and use it when you're just to be aware. Like, awareness is huge. It's a great first step. And I don't think you can unhear, like, if anybody who's listening, you can't unhear what's been said here today. Right? Like, when my sister came home way back when and said, I'm an emotional eater, she announced it. And I thought, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I just like food. Like, she may be an emotional eater, whatever that is, but I like food. That's it. End of story. But then I couldn't unhear those words, emotional eating. And I started to observe, like, I'm not so normal around food. It's not just that I like food. There's a little bit more to it. And so my awareness was raised. My consciousness was raised. And so that's true here right now, is that if you're hearing about the PEP test, this is something you can use just to observe your relationship with food. Like, is it just that you like food? Is it just, of course, I still like food. I love food. I love to eat. My choices are much healthier now. I get satisfaction out of healthier foods. It's not diet food anymore. It just feels good to treat my body with love, and put the right foods in that make me feel more energetic and happy and satisfied, But just observe what's going on inside, what's driving us to the refrigerator.
Because this is, like you said, like, we had this was a little while ago, we had a addiction therapist come on the show. And for any addiction, that was the one thing, was how do you start bringing in awareness? There's not the pressure to immediately do anything, but how do you bring the awareness in? And that's such a great acronym to think about it, just to see, what is it doing for you? I know for me, food was an escape. Even to this day, there are some moments where I think about that, and then you have to just kind of reframe and balance it out, which is kind of the next question for you, is how did you go from just starting this awareness to now being where you are? Because I think I read that you've been 30 years maintaining that weight loss, which is insane.
Yeah. I'm very, very grateful. But, I had to have a ton of support. My experience is, this isn't for somebody who takes that quiz and they're like on the higher end of the spectrum, it's an addictive habit. And, studies show you can't overcome an addiction on your own. And there's so much shame around having a food issue, like being out of control of food. And so we think more than ever, I'm going to fix this on my own, because we don't want anybody to know how out of control we are. But if it's like going to the gym or working out, we don't mind hiring a trainer. Like I go to Bar Method several days a week, and I go because I can't do it alone. I mean, we don't mind doing it when it's something other than food, because with food, we're all like crazy, ashamed, blaming ourselves, thinking we're somehow morally failing if we don't have control around food. But to me, it's the hardest of all addictive habits to overcome. Like,
Yeah.
of course, we need support. Like, you have to eat. You have to literally take that tiger out of the cage 3 times a day, pet the kitty, and then get it back in the cage without it tearing your ass off. So that's not easy. You'd better get support, so stop thinking I should do this on my own. That's denial is one of the biggest characteristics of an addiction. But my experience is community. Like I do my programs in community, you probably do too. Like the community is so powerful, because we all think we're the only ones who have done the crazy things we've done, but you're in community with other people. It just lessens that sense of alienation and isolation and self-blame, to say, oh, like it normalizes, like a lot of people have this problem, and then when you're getting support, like me in my bar class, when you're around other people who are doing the same hard thing, changing their life, it makes it so much easier to follow through.
Yeah, the community is essential. This is not possible to do without community
No way.
because, as you said, there's so much shame, there's so much guilt. And if you aren't around other people who are experiencing that, you can't destigmatize it because you only see that you should be able to solve this. And you don't
Yeah,
see thousands, if not millions, of people who are struggling with
totally.
the exact same thing in different degrees.
Or we're constantly talking about our weight, or constantly asking if I look fat. Like, do I look fat? Do I look fat? It's like, it's not easy being with our eating disorder, and so, it's not something you can do on your own. And you give your, really, it affects the relationships in so many ways. And you give your partner a break when you have the right community, because our partners, if they don't have this problem, they can't understand it. They think we're nuts. They tell us to eat less and exercise more. They're well-meaning, but they can't possibly understand. So that's another reason why community is so important, because, get support from the people who get you.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that. I think this is where the last question comes in so naturally, which is if people are seeking that community and they're seeking that support, how can they connect with you?
Sure. Well, I would recommend taking that quiz on my website. So the emotional eating quiz is great. Start there. And then based on your personalized score, you'll get some action steps you can take. My website has a lot of other things. My TEDx talk is on there, and some other resources as well. So I'd say go to healyourhunger.com. I'm also on Instagram at Tricia Nelson _ and I have some fun videos, around healing and the healing journey and overcoming binge eating and that kind of thing.
Amazing. I'm going to include all links in the show notes. And thank you so much for coming on the show, especially for the time of year when this is going to go live. It's really going to help reframe people running to the next diet or the next crazy workout plan.
Amen. Yeah, you deserve freedom, and it's not about the food. So like let's take that beautiful healing journey, and I'd be happy to hear from anybody. And thank you so much for having me on your show. You're just such a beautiful soul, and I really honor the work that you do to help people heal.